Once upon a time, lizards were as big as houses and sea snakes were as big as whales. Here are some of the biggest prehistoric creatures that you've never heard of. Pterosphenus. There are still snakes alive today that slither through the oceans of the world, but nothing alive now can compare to the terrifying creature known as Pterosphenus. It was a sea snake of unimaginable proportions. The serpent was part of a group called Elethinophidia. This group still survives to this day, including all snakes except for blind snakes and thread snakes. There were many subfamilies, but it's so hard to find fossilized evidence that their origins are a complete mystery. Only a handful of partial remains have been discovered of Pterosphenus. Scientists have used regression models to estimate how big the snake was, but all of the models result in different lengths. The most reliable estimate is that Pterosphenus grew to over 15 feet long. However, remember, this is based on just a few scraps of bone. For all we know, they could have been over 19 feet in length, maybe even longer. This creature was a snake that grew almost 20 feet long and lived only in the water. It was a marine serpent from the Eocene epoch, which took place between 56 and 33.9 million years ago. During this time, much of the eastern United States was underwater, including Texas, Louisiana, and all the way up to New Jersey. It was in this shallow sea that the gigantic snake lurked. Fossils have also been found in Morocco, Nigeria, and Egypt. It's highly likely that the snake was clever enough to spread around the entire globe. However, what they ate and how they hunted is completely unknown. And now for number 9, but first, it's shoutout time! I wanted to give a big thank you to Seth Bowden for the super thanks for supporting this channel. You are awesome, and thanks so much for spending time with us. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Origins Explained for more videos like this. Giganotosaurus. Giganotosaurus is one of the most frightening creatures to ever grace the surface of the planet. It was taller than the T-Rex and could have had a bite force roughly 3 times more powerful. In 2005, paleontologist Francois Terrier estimated that Giganotosaurus had lower jaws that were designed specifically for inflicting wounds that bleed. This dinosaur had bleed damage turned all the way to maximum. Giganotosaurus likely sliced through its prey's flesh, then let them go off to bleed to death before it made a meal of them. It might be considered brutal by human standards, but this was the dinosaur age and there were no rules. Giganotosaurus's savage hunting methods likely allowed it to eat prey that most carnivorous beasts wouldn't be able to finish off. Scientists have even found the fossils of titanosaurs near Giganotosaurus remains, suggesting that Giganotosaurus hunted the biggest plant eaters that ever walked the earth. But just how big was this dinosaur? That's the question I know you're itching to have answered. Rough estimates place Giganotosaurus at about 41.6 feet in length, maybe even a little bigger. Like most animals, they likely came in a variety of sizes, but 41 feet was close to average. Now that you know how big Giganotosaurus was, how fast do you think it could run? What's a reasonable speed for a 41-foot giant dinosaur that weighs roughly 9 tons? The answer is over 18 miles per hour. Giganotosaurus was big and deadly, and it wasn't afraid to chase a meal. The horse dragon. 125 million years ago in Utah, there was an enormous creature that scientists are now calling a horse dragon. It sounds like an abomination from mythology, but it was a real dinosaur that once roamed the United States of America. The bones of the horse dragon were uncovered in 2004. Scientists named it Hippodrakoscutodens. Hippo means horse and Draco means dragon, hence the awesome name. The last part, scutodens, means oblong shield tooth. So its full name in English is horse dragon oblong shield tooth, which is quite a handful of characteristics to shove into one animal's name. But just what exactly was this thing? The dinosaur was an iguanodont that grew to roughly 15 feet, and it wasn't the only one of its kind to be found fossilized in Utah. Not far from the horse dragon, paleontologists unearthed the remains of a creature they named the ponderous beast. This other dinosaur's scientific name is Iguanocolossus. It's also a member of the iguanodont family, only it lived a few million years prior to the evolution of the horse dragon. Iguanocolossus was significantly bigger than its cousin, growing a massive 33 feet from head to tail. Iguanodonts were extremely successful during the early Cretaceous period, between 145 and 100.5 million years ago. They spread across the world and devoured plants everywhere they went. They weren't carnivores, but humongous plant-eating lizards. You can imagine them as herbivore iguanas that wandered around on two legs and were nearly as tall as an elephant. Scientists have called them the cows of the Cretaceous, although they were more like the humongous lizard cows of the Cretaceous. Megalania. Megalania prisca was the largest terrestrial lizard that ever lived. Maybe there was an even larger lizard once upon a time, but scientists haven't found it yet. This thing was the undisputed king of the lizards, dominating a certain landmass during the Pleistocene epoch. The first set of Megalania remains was uncovered in 1859 in Australia. Since then, scientists have learned a lot about the vicious reptilian. It was a legit savage whose closest living relative is the Komodo dragon. But compared to the Komodo dragon, Megalania was a titan. Megalania could grow over 15 feet long, which is pretty big for a lizard that wasn't even a dinosaur. The huge lizard likely ate mammals and snakes, and even cannibalized other reptiles. It lived in forests and woodlands and stalked the grasslands of prehistoric Australia. It had small bones and sharp teeth. It's also never been found anywhere else but in Australia. Many of its fossils have been found tangled with the fossils of prehistoric kangaroos. But this lizard was the boss of the whole continent. Surprisingly, they almost made it into modern times. The youngest fossilized remains of a Megalania are dated to 50,000 years ago. And although no modern people have laid eyes on them, the very first indigenous settlers of Australia undoubtedly did. They may have even hunted them to extinction, or at least worsened their situation. Either that or Megalania terrorized early humans until they went extinct. Massive tracks. On Britain's Isle of Wight, scientists just identified the fossilized footprints of an enormous dinosaur that walked along the beach 125 million years ago. The footprints were found by engineers hidden between a seaside cafe and a parking lot. People had been sipping coffee only a few feet from evidence of Earth's prehistoric past. The footprints are believed to have been left by a creature called Mantellosaurus. It was a plant eater, so it wasn't particularly ferocious, but it was astoundingly large, growing an estimated 25 feet in length. It stomped around on four legs, and at some point it left its mark next to where human beings would brew coffee millions of years in the future. What you might not know is the Isle of Wight is the richest location for dinosaur remains in Europe. That's according to Dr. Martin Munt from the local dinosaur museum. Scientists have already found 35 different types of dinos who lived in the area. It was densely populated by ancient species of crocodiles and monstrous amphibians. Weird plants also grew here, and bloodthirsty pterosaurs sat perched on their thick branches. This place in the past was pretty awesome. The giant penguin. Scientists in New Zealand have found evidence of a giant penguin. And when I say giant, I mean seriously enormous. 50 million years ago, there were several penguin species that grew significantly larger than humans. One of them was 340 pounds. The new penguin was 3 times bigger than the biggest penguin alive today. It still couldn't fly, and instead had to waddle around as a bizarre behemoth of a bird. Life was pretty good in New Zealand millions of years ago, though. The massive penguins had plenty of food to eat, clogging the beaches in massive groups. Seeing these oversized, flightless tuxedo birds congregating in the sand would have been a truly special experience. The newly found giant penguin has been named Kumimanu fordyce by scientists. The fossils were found by paleontologist Alan Tennyson in 2016 and 2017. The fossils were hiding inside boulders that had been split open by the shifting tides on New Zealand's shoreline. It was like somebody cracked open a Kinder Surprise to reveal a new species of terrifying beach bird. To give you a bit of a comparison, let me tell you about the modern emperor penguin. It's the largest living species of penguin, with adults reaching between 55 and 100 pounds. In all honesty, 100 pounds may be a bit of a stretch, but it could happen. Although even then, they weren't comparable to the much larger penguins, which likely use their immense size to ward off predators. Thunder beast. With a name like Thunder Beast, you know this creature is going to be enormous. Thunder beasts are believed to have been the first large mammals in the world. They were kind of like rhinoceroses, but bigger and scarier. Thunder beasts, known scientifically as Brontotheres, could weigh over 2,200 pounds. Some of them stood over 8 feet tall at the shoulder. Scientists think they got so big because there was so much competition after the death of the dinosaurs. If you wanted access to the best meals, you had to fight for it. The dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago. It didn't happen all at once, but over a few million years, all the great dinosaurs were gone. In the wake of the destruction, mammals went on the offensive. But for those first few years, mammals were no larger than small dogs. It took about 20 million years for mammals to evolve into behemoths. The very first thunder beasts were hardly deserving of the name. They only grew to roughly 40 pounds. It took a staggering 54 million years of evolution before North America was overrun with big descendants of the original thunder beasts. At their height, researchers think there were at least 57 Brontotheres species across the globe, and most of them weighed over a ton. But the biggest of them weighed way more. But what was the point of growing so big? Scientists from the University of Alcalá think it's because size matters. Bigger thunder beasts could reach higher branches, and they could defend themselves better against their enemies. Being big meant having access to more food. Titanotylopus. When people think about camels, the places that come to mind are likely the deserts of Africa and the steppes of Asia. But until recently, there were giant camels wandering across North America. In fact, camels originated in North America roughly 44 million years ago. If you were in Southern California 28 million years ago, you would have seen the small camel species called Titanotylopus. But if you lived 3 million years ago in Southern California, you would have seen its way bigger descendant, the mega camel known as Titanotylopus. Titanotylopus was one of the last surviving camels in North America. They'd been wandering from the jungles of Honduras to the snow-capped mountains of Alaska. They were distinguished from the camels that came before them by simply being huge. Titanotylopus had massive canines with broad incisors that were the size of cooking spatulas. At the shoulders, Titanotylopus stood a whopping 11 feet tall. It also weighed about 5,500 pounds. And yes, it had a hump. Just like modern camels today, it had a hump on its back for fat storage. The Tusked Amphibian. One of the oldest and most outrageous creatures ever found in Australia is a giant amphibian with tusks and teeth. Researchers recently described the monstrous creature in a new study. They've called it Arena Erpeton supinatus, but everyone's referring to it as the Tusked Amphibian. The lizard-like animal lived 240 million years ago and is unique when it comes to its place in the animal kingdom, which is really saying something. Its fossils were dug out of a quarry in the 1990s, but only now have scientists at the University of New South Wales studied the remains. Scientists can't always investigate all the bones they find, and thousands of them go in drawers and are forgotten for years. This is a perfect example of a unique fossil being overlooked for decades just because nobody had time to look at it. The fossil is in excellent shape and includes almost a whole skeleton. The creature belonged to a group of extinct animals called temnospondyls, and they lived before and during the dinosaur age. But just what is it that makes this creepy amphibian so special? According to researchers at the university, it looked very similar to the Chinese giant salamander, or even like a Japanese giant salamander. However, it was considerably bigger. It had massive teeth and a heavy body, along with tusks sprouting from the roof of its mouth. Picture a salamander bred with a warthog, and that's kind of what's going on here. The hog-like swamp dweller likely lived in freshwater river environments across prehistoric Australia. It would have hunted fish, but scientists don't know if it could have attacked terrestrial creatures too. The tusked amphibian was alive during a time when Australia was way closer to the South Pole. The entire continent was a very different world and would have been unrecognizable to Australians today, especially with warthog lizards hiding in the river. Alamosaurus. There is a dinosaur in New Mexico that's named after the Alamo, and it was a real beast of a creature. Its name is Alamosaurus sanjuanensis, and it stomped across the world during the late Cretaceous period 70 million years ago. It was a land leviathan with a long neck for munching on high branches. It also had a giant tail that could easily launch little velociraptors like a slingshot. The Alamosaurus was a sauropod that was officially classified as a titanosaur. That basically means it was the biggest of the big. It was first discovered in New Mexico by a coal geologist in 1921. It immediately became one of the most important dinosaurs for the state, and today its bones are exhibited front and center at the New Mexico Museum of Natural History and Science. It measured an astounding 100 feet from the top of its head to the tip of its tail. Experts think they could have weighed as much as 80 short tons or more. Much of that weight wasn't even from meat, but from the bony armor that covered the dinosaur's skin. It wasn't enough just to be huge. It also had to have its very own suit of bone armor to keep it safe from predators. Thanks for watching! Be sure to stay tuned for extra content you might have missed.
The sea beast. A newly discovered fossil has revealed a terrifying aquatic predator that scientists have compared to the T-Rex. They are calling this beast the underwater Rex, a fierce and relentless hunter that lived during the late Cretaceous period. It's not a totally new kind of creature, but could be a new species of the already identified mosasaur. The prehistoric monster has been named Thalassotitan atrox, and it lived between 145 and 66 million years ago. The creature likely had a head that looked reptilian and hunted challenging prey such as sea turtles, plesiosaurs, and other mosasaurs. It also had a tail fin kind of like a shark and was at the very top of the food chain. It didn't matter where in the ocean it was. There was nothing else nearly as scary. Paleontologist Nick Longrich from the University of Bath described it best when he said the prehistoric mosasaur was like a Komodo dragon mixed with a great white shark, but with a T-Rex and a killer whale mixed in for good measure. It was a total abomination, one that could reach 40 feet in length. It was bigger than any other reptile, with its closest living relatives being snakes and iguanas. You might think crocodiles or alligators, but nope. Iguanas. What truly separates the Thalassotitan from other species of mosasaur is that it appears to have been far more aggressive. Its fossilized teeth were found broken and worn, suggesting they had been used to rip through the bones of other large predatory fish. Nobody knows for sure what animals it was eating, but scientists believe it was crunching the bones of its own kind. The Troodon. The Troodon lived 76 million years ago during the peak of dinosaur evolution. It was a small dinosaur considering the competition at the time, standing only 11 feet tall and weighing around 110 pounds. Like other dinosaurs, it laid eggs and had similar traits to birds and crocodiles. However, scientists are unsure if this slender and bizarre dinosaur was an ancestor of either or both. What made the Troodon a truly exceptional and terrifying predator was its brain. Its brain was huge, even larger than the brains of modern reptiles in relation to its size. Scientists speculate that with its massive brain, the Troodon was far more intelligent than the average dinosaur, and perhaps even more intelligent than modern birds. That's what's earned the Troodon the title of World's Smartest Dinosaur. Not only was the Troodon a genius, but it was also a skilled killer. It had larger than average eyes so that it could hunt at night or in the dark. It was also considered an omnivorous predator. It had grasping hands that it could use to shovel vegetables and nuts into its mouth. while also possessing sharp teeth for ripping apart animals smaller than itself. But here's the best part about the clever Troodon. In 1982, Canadian paleontologist Dale Russell speculated that if the Troodon had survived the extinction of the dinosaurs, it would have evolved to have human-level intelligence. He believed that it would have continued to grow just like how monkeys grew into humans. Eventually, the Troodon would have become a brainy, perceptive, walking and talking reptile with partially opposable thumbs and 3 fingers on its hand. If that's not terrifying, I don't know what is. Pterosaurus. In the world of prehistory, there were 2 giant crocodilians that make all living crocodilians look like baby lizards. There was the Sarcosuchus and the Pterosaurus. No one is really sure which one was bigger, though many scientists lean toward the Pterosaurus as being the largest crocodilian that ever walked the face of the earth. This terrifying reptile lived 8 million years ago in South America. It had a huge head, sharp teeth, and an unprecedented bite force. Its bite was so strong that its teeth would have sunk through muscle and bone like a hydraulic press. A single bite would have shattered the internal structures of whatever it attacked, rupturing organs and causing the animal to die in seconds. Just like modern crocodiles, the Pterosaurus was an ambush predator. This thing would have been found lurking around lakes and swamps, waiting for thirsty, unwitting animals to show up for a drink. Then it would have burst out of the water and captured its victim in its powerful jaws. Nobody knows exactly how large the prehistoric crocodilian grew, but based on fossils of its skull, it grew anywhere between 34 and 41 feet long. It also weighed an average of about 6.2 tons. Unfortunately, the only remains that have ever been found are skulls. Paleontologists have never discovered fragments of its body, making its exact size unknown. Giganotosaurus. The Giganotosaurus was even bigger than the Tyrannosaurus rex. Scientists believe the heaviest Giganotosaurus was about 10 tons, whereas a female T-Rex could weigh just a little over 9 tons. It's not really a huge difference, but it's enough to make the Giganotosaurus one of the biggest predators in the history of the planet. It wasn't the largest carnivore of all time, as that was the Spinosaurus. Still, it was so massive that its preferred prey was the Argentinosaurus, a creature that outweighed the Giganotosaurus by over 40 tons. An adult Argentinosaurus was a true behemoth of the dinosaur, a kind of sauropod that could grow to an estimated 115 feet in length. But here's where things get truly terrifying. Researchers believe there is no way a Giganotosaurus could have knocked over and killed an Argentinosaurus by itself. Instead, they believe the largest carnivore to ever live in South America hunted in groups. They may have had behavior similar to modern wolves, working together to take down prey significantly larger than themselves. And while you might think the Giganotosaurus was a slow-moving monster, that wasn't the case at all. It's believed it could run faster than the smaller T-Rex, potentially reaching speeds of up to 20 miles per hour. The Microraptor. In Greek, the name Microraptor translates to small thief. This dinosaur is one of the smallest ever discovered, and, according to National Geographic, the smallest official species of raptor. It only weighed about 2 pounds and stood 1 foot tall, about the size of a crow. It had extremely sharp claws, which it used for climbing to the tops of trees and searching out its prey. The Microraptor could then launch itself from the treetop and glide like a flying squirrel, catching insects in its mouth and landing on lower branches. This thing was unlike any raptor that we know of, and unlike any other dinosaur as well. It had feathers, it could basically fly, and its arm bones were almost identical to the bones in modern birds. In the realm of all things terrifying, the raptor was a little terror. It wasn't as big and dangerous as a 30-foot turkey, but if it was alive today, it would definitely be a horrifying nuisance. Just imagine a bunch of crow-sized dinosaurs with razor-sharp teeth loitering on the power lines outside your house. The Microraptor was kind of like an oversized hummingbird with a hunger for meat. Scientists have also confirmed its feathers were iridescent, meaning it had a metallic shine as it glided through the air. The Microraptor wasn't the only prehistoric creature that could glide either. There was another feathered glider called the Archaeopteryx that existed 25 million years before the Microraptor. The only difference is that the Archaeopteryx wasn't a raptor. It was a non-avian link between dinosaurs and modern birds. The Gigantoraptor. The Gigantoraptor, despite the name, was not technically a raptor. It was a dinosaur that lived about 95 million years ago and weighed about 2 tons. Its closest relative was the much smaller Oviraptor. When compared to a human, a fully grown individual wouldn't have stood any taller than its knees. It was truly huge, and yet all we know about it comes from a single fossil specimen found in Mongolia in 2005. The fossil was found by accident by a Chinese paleontologist while filming a documentary about a totally unrelated dinosaur. The Gigantoraptor is believed to have been a kind of Oviraptorosaur, a group of dinos that walked on 2 legs and looked kind of like turkeys. Oviraptorosaurs are most famous these days for their rude habit of stealing and eating the eggs of other dinosaurs. They were egg thieves, although the Gigantoraptor was most likely too big to be partaking in that behavior. Instead, it was really just a giant turkey. It would have looked almost identical to everybody's favorite Thanksgiving bird, except that it stood 26 feet tall. The prehistoric creature was so big, it could have easily consumed a whole family of humans for a midday snack. Pterodactyls. Pterodactyls were some of the most terrifying creatures that dominated the skies during the age of the dinosaurs. They weren't technically dinosaurs, but were flying reptiles. They had bat-like wings, only extremely large, but there were a lot of different kinds of pterodactyls, and each one was unique. The biggest pterodactyl of them all was also the largest flying animal that ever lived. It's called the Quetzalcoatlus northropi, and it lived 67 million years ago. Its wingspan is estimated to have been anywhere between 35 and 52 feet. Either one would have made it positively gigantic, nearly the size of an airplane. With great big wings came a great big body. The Quetzalcoatlus was most likely around 32 feet from the tip of its beak to the end of its tail, and weighed anywhere from 150 to 550 pounds. But the most notable feature of this giant reptile was its skull. It had an extremely long beak, kind of like a stork, which it could have used for picking dinosaurs off the ground, like you might pick up an ant with a pair of tweezers. And while it could have done that, it probably didn't. Like most flying animals, the Quetzalcoatlus likely sustained itself on a diet of fish. Homotherium latidens. The Homotherium latidens is an extinct genus of saber-toothed cat that lived throughout North America, Africa, and Eurasia up until very recently, only about 28,000 years ago. These big cats were some of the most brutal predators of both the Pliocene and the Pleistocene, growing just about 4 feet at the shoulder and weighing as much as an African lion. The biggest difference between the Homotherium and other saber-toothed cats like the Smilodon was that it had surprisingly short upper canines. Unlike those 2 big teeth that make saber-toothed cats so famous, the ones the Homotherium had were short, flat, and serrated. Still, they were powerful instruments for hunting. It used its incisors and canines as a puncturing device, killing just about anything it sunk its fangs into instantly. Even though it had shorter teeth, its head was larger than other saber-toothed cats, and it had a more muscular jaw. This meant each bite had a higher chance of being fatal. Sadly, just like all the other saber-toothed cats, the Homotherium went extinct as the Ice Age came to an end. But the animal still had a pretty long run before extinction. It likely evolved into its final form about 5 million years ago, then became such a skilled predator that it migrated to all the corners of the world. Its bones have been found everywhere from Africa to South America. Chalicotherium. The Chalicotherium lived 15 million years ago, long after the dinosaurs were already extinct. It's one of the only animals known to science that's unclassifiable because it doesn't have a single direct living descendant. Although it was a gigantic mammal, that's the only thing scientists can classify it as. Some have suggested it could be an extremely distant relative of the horse, but that's only speculation. The truth is that the Chalicotherium did not look or behave like any mammal still alive today. It had a bunch of bizarre features that made it look like a freaky animal created in somebody's dream. Its front legs were longer than its hind legs, and it walked kind of like a gorilla, dragging its knuckles across the ground. It had claws rather than hooves, which it likely used to scrape vegetation from trees. It may have resembled a giant sloth, although it was, at the same time, nothing like a giant sloth. So how dangerous was this creature? Scientists know based on fossil evidence that it stood roughly 9 feet tall and weighed 1 ton. It would have been a difficult creature to kill, with adults having practically no natural predators. It was like a bigger and much more muscular gorilla, only more similar to a horse or something with hooves. It didn't eat meat, preferring a diet of leaves and fruits. But still, it definitely was able to defend itself with its scythe-like claws. Small eyes, big bite. The T-Rex had very small arms. Most people think of the Tyrannosaurus rex as the king of the dinosaurs, with stubby little hands that weren't much use at all. But new research shows that not only did the most famous dinosaur in history have tiny arms, but it also had unusually small eyes. Researchers from the University of Birmingham believe its tiny eyeballs helped it to bite even harder. It all has to do with the eye sockets. The team investigated the oval eye sockets of the T-Rex and found them to be unexpectedly narrow. It appears that by evolving narrower eye sockets, thereby reducing the space needed to house the eyeballs, the T-Rex freed up space for jaw muscles to grow. This increased the robustness of the T-Rex skull, increased its jaw muscles, and allowed for a much more powerful bite. The big trade-off was that it gradually developed much smaller eyeballs. This left it borderline visually impaired. The T-Rex would have had utterly atrocious vision, hardly able to see anything except movement. But really, that was all the great carnivore needed. Once he locked onto a victim, his massive mouth and dagger-like teeth took care of the rest. Giant killer dinosaur. The Meraxes gigas was quite similar to the Tyrannosaurus rex in that it was a huge meat-eating dinosaur with tiny arms. This terrifying new creature was discovered by paleontologists just recently in the northern Patagonian region of Argentina. The skull of the new dinosaur was first unearthed in 2012, and since then, many more of its bones have been excavated. It's an entirely new species, a creature with laughable forelimbs that scientists say gave the apex predator a survival advantage. While we may mock these kinds of dinosaurs for having stubby little arms, they weren't totally useless. This particular dinosaur weighed a whopping 4 tons, but may have even grown larger. It was near the top of the food chain between 90 million and 100 million years ago in what is now Argentina. It was a type of Carcharodontosaurid, meaning it belonged to a family of carnivorous theropods, dinosaurs that walked on 2 legs. It was also at the peak of evolution of such dinosaurs. What I mean by peak evolution is that this was the best rendition of the theropod carnivore. It had reached such a high level of development that scientists believe it had facial ornamentation linked to social signaling. In other words, it was starting to develop facial expressions and characteristics quite similar to our own. As for its short forelimbs, those were used for mating activities. Scientists aren't sure how, but they definitely had something to do with attracting partners. Therizinosaurus. By far the most terrifying prehistoric beast might have been the Therizinosaurus. This creature stands out from all others because of its size and savage ferocity. It had claws on the ends of its fingers that made it the Edward Scissorhands of the prehistoric world. These things were so long that it could have cut a person into 3 pieces with one swipe. It also only had 3 fingers, with its extraordinarily long claws extending from each one like nightmare manicured nails. So how long were these deadly finger swords? Scientists say the claws were at least 3 feet long each, maybe even longer. That's about the length of an ordinary person's leg. And these things were sharp and unstoppable. Plus, the Therizinosaurus stood an estimated 30 feet tall, over 3 times taller than a human. But even though this thing had samurai swords at the ends of its hands, it wasn't a carnivore. It was an herbivore, although scientists don't know for sure 100%. They believe it used its deadly weapons for reaching into the trees and pulling down vegetation. It was almost like an overgrown sloth. So far, the only known location of the Therizinosaurus is Mongolia. It lived in the Gobi Desert about 70 million years ago. Beelzebufo. In modern times, the only frogs people need to be afraid of are the ones that excrete poison through their skin, like the tiny, colorful ones found in places like the Amazon jungle. But between 65 and 70 million years ago on the island of Madagascar, there was a creature known as the devil frog that would have been positively horrifying. It lived during the late Cretaceous period and was most likely the largest frog that ever lived. According to National Geographic, the Beelzebufo was the size of a beach ball, weighing about 10 pounds and growing to be 16 inches long. That doesn't seem like much, but this frog was roughly the size of a small dog. And here's another thing that makes the Beelzebufo such a terrifying creature. Unlike its docile living relatives, the devil frog was mean and aggressive. Scientists say it was an ambush predator that would have attacked anything that got too close. It would have snatched lizards, small vertebrates, and even newly born dinosaurs. This frog had an incredibly powerful set of jaws, along with a massive mouth. It had all the tools it needed to crunch dinosaur bones and swallow small hatchlings. One thing that still baffles scientists is that the only living relatives of the Beelzebufo are found far from Madagascar in South America. Scientists don't understand how the descendants of the greatest frog that ever lived migrated so far across seemingly open water. They believe there must have been a land bridge between Africa and Antarctica about 65 million years ago. The super piranha. The modern red-bellied piranha can grow to about 20 inches in length. That's just shy of 2 feet. But the Megapiranha paranensis, which lived between 6 and 10 million years ago at the same time as the megalodon, grew to be even bigger. Researchers believe it was nearly 30 inches long and weighed roughly 30 pounds. It had incredible zigzag teeth that it used to slice flesh like a mouthful of razor blades. It also had one of the most incredible bite forces of any fish throughout the planet's history. The bite force of a Tyrannosaurus rex was roughly 3,000 pounds. Nobody knows for sure, but that's a solid estimate. The Megapiranha had a bite force of 1,000 pounds. To put that into perspective, the Megapiranha was about 100 times smaller than the T-Rex, yet it had an almost comparable bite force. The Megapiranha's unforgiving chompers would have meant certain mutilation to anything unfortunate enough to get stuck between them. If that meant your arm, it was coming right off. Lucky for us, this creature went extinct a long time ago. It had made its home in the rivers and waterways of South America, where its modern relatives still live, terrorizing unsuspecting swimmers and biting their fingers off. Just kidding. Only sometimes. Baryonyx. The Baryonyx was a truly frightening carnivore. It also had a similar body to the T-Rex, meaning it was large and plodded around on 2 legs. But it was less of a lizard with long legs and more of a reptile mixed with a heron. The Baryonyx was an expert fisherman that grew to be over 30 feet long. It had extremely sharp and finely serrated teeth that were great for ripping apart the flesh of fish. It also had a spectacularly long neck and a mouth shaped just like a crocodile's mouth, which made it perfect for snatching prey out of the water. Unlike other carnivorous theropods during the age of the dinosaurs, the Baryonyx was a passive hunter. It didn't chase down food and terrorize other dinosaurs. It spent most of its time crouched at the edge of riverbanks or wading into the shallow water to catch fish. But just because the Baryonyx was a fisherman didn't mean it wasn't dangerous. This thing had claws that were like metal hooks. It could cut and disembowel, and its arms were actually long enough to do something with. Unlike the T-Rex. It was also a scavenger and would have chased lesser animals away from their kills and stolen their food. Dreadnoughtus. The Dreadnoughtus is an extinct genus of sauropod, a truly gargantuan herbivore that had a neck 37 feet long. Sauropods were the biggest land animals that ever lived, defined by their large size, their preposterously long necks, and their 4 thick legs. They had really tiny heads, and their legs were like concrete pillars to support their immense weight. Then at their backs, they had extremely long tails like whips. Recently, researchers even discovered that sauropods had soft, padded feet to help them carry all that bulk. The Dreadnoughtus was not the biggest sauropod of them all, but it was a hefty monster. It had a length of at least 85 feet and weighed 65 tons. Only 2 fossils have been found, both in 2014 in southern Patagonia. The fossils date back 77 million years. The Dreadnoughtus was technically a kind of titanosaur, closely related to the Argentinosaurus, the largest dinosaur that ever existed, and the Saltasaurus. Scientists have speculated that because of their long necks, they wouldn't have needed to move very much. They would have walked no more than a few feet, then stood around all day munching on vegetation. If anything unpleasant got near them, they would use their tail to slap it away. The Giganotosaurus. The Giganotosaurus was the largest known eurypterid that ever lived. Eurypterids were armed predators of the ocean that looked like sea scorpions, and they evolved about 467 million years ago and continued to thrive until 248 million years ago. That was an extremely long time before the first dinosaur hatched, or before the first dinosaur laid an egg, whichever came first. Eurypterids are particularly fascinating because they were bigger than anything you could imagine. Picture a scorpion, only much larger, and swimming through the water to get you. That's how terrifying these things were. They lived at a time when the oceans were brimming with life. With their impenetrable armor, their snapping claws, and their many legs, they were able to effectively prey on just about anything. Some eurypterids were quite small, no larger than the size of a child. But the Giganotosaurus was gigantic, with an unbelievable length of roughly 10 feet. It grew to shocking proportions, which may have been unmatched by any other arthropod to this day. These were animals like beetles and spiders, as eurypterids were some of the first arthropods to evolve. The Giganotosaurus didn't live in the ocean, but lurked in fresh water like lakes and rivers, hunting fish and maybe even its own kind. The giant stork. In prehistoric Indonesia, about 50,000 years ago, there was a giant carnivorous stork. This was not like the stork you heard of as a child, the happy bird that brings babies to people through their windows. This was a stork that would have preyed on human babies. While ancient hominins competed for food on the tropical island in Indonesia, they had to deal with the gigantic birds not only stealing their food, but also trying to eat them. The bird is called Leptoptylos robustus, and it was at least 6 feet tall. If you've ever been down to the river and seen a heron standing in the water waiting for a fish to go by, the prehistoric stork was about 6 times larger than that. It lived in Indonesia during a particularly unique period. There were gigantic birds, huge elephant-like creatures called stegodon, and hobbits. Yes, hobbits. There was an ancient race of human ancestors called Homo floresiensis, who stood only about 3 feet tall. They were tiny, and scientists say resembled the hobbits from The Lord of the Rings more than ordinary people today. Because of their small stature, you can see why the ancient hominins had such a difficult time competing with 6-foot birds. One of the scientists who studied the new stork fossils, Dr. Hanneke Meyer, said that because the gigantic stork could fly, it would have been a direct competitor with early hominins. The mosasaur. The mosasaur lived 80 million years ago and was one of the most ferocious beasts that ever roamed the world's oceans. In 2022, the skeleton of a mosasaur was found 80 miles from Dallas. Dr. Ron Tchaikovsky from the Perot Museum of Nature and Science helped direct the dig to retrieve this animal's bones. A 30-foot sea monster that was kind of like a mix between a crocodile and the Loch Ness Monster. It was an extremely massive marine reptile that grew to be the top predator in the ocean following the extinction of the ichthyosaurs and the pliosaurs. Then, when the asteroid struck our planet 66 million years ago, the mosasaur went extinct with the rest of the dinosaurs. Animals like sharks and crocodiles survived, but the mosasaur didn't make the cut. One of the interesting things about the mosasaur is just how diverse its family was. The smallest of them all was the Dallosaurus turneri, which grew to be less than 3.5 feet long. while the biggest of them all, the Mosasaurus hoffmanni, could grow to be over 56 feet long. As of right now, the largest Mosasaurus skeleton on display can be found at the Canadian Fossil Discovery Centre in Manitoba. The specimen's name is Bruce, and it's 43 feet long. The mosasaur was a weird mix between a whale and a lizard. That's honestly the best way to describe it. The creature had a body shaped kind of like a monitor lizard, except streamlined for swimming. They also had paddles which evolved by spreading web-like flesh between their long finger and toe bones. It's a perfect example of how lizards slowly evolved into the most terrifying predators of the ocean. Allosaurus. The Allosaurus was almost like the baby brother of the T-Rex. It was one of the first dinosaurs ever discovered. Its fossils have been dug up from all over the world, and it was just as prevalent on land as the Megalodon was at sea. It was a gigantic bipedal carnivore with small arms, a big head, and deadly teeth. The Allosaurus lived from sometime around 155 million years ago until 150 million years ago. It was a Jurassic dinosaur and was particularly numerous in what is now Utah. At the Cleveland Lloyd Quarry, which boasts the densest concentration of Jurassic bones on the planet, 46 out of 74 of the dinosaurs identified were allosaurs. This shows just how prolific they really were. Plus, they have been found all over the place, from Portugal to Siberia and even in Tanzania in Africa. There were many different species of Allosaurus, at least 8. Scientists say the largest of these species could almost rival the T-Rex. A 1976 analysis of one of their skeletons in the Utah Geological Survey Bulletin estimated the biggest Allosaurus could grow to an estimated 43 feet long and 16 feet tall. Another interesting fact is that the Allosaurus had a pretty long lifespan. Adults could probably live up to at least 28 years. While that wasn't the oldest an animal could be at the time, it was still a pretty long life for a gigantic lizard. Carnifex carolinensis. A completely new species of prehistoric crocodile was recently discovered by a team of paleontologists out of North Carolina. The lead scientist on the team was Dr. Lindsay Zano, and she says the crocodile dates back 231 million years. The creature is called Carnifex carolinensis, but if you don't want it to be so scientific, you can just call it the Carolina Butcher. It's one of the earliest crocodilomorphs to ever exist. This ancient beast was one of the first, most ferocious, and most dangerous extinct crocodile relatives that ever lived. Here's where things get wild. The Carolina Butcher may not have been as large as some crocodiles living today. It only grew to a maximum of about 9 feet, but it did walk on its hind legs. This ancient croc-like lizard monster could run like a bear, which is honestly terrifying. During the time it was alive, it was an apex predator in the North Carolina ecosystem. It would have eaten everything from small armored reptiles to the earliest mammal relatives. It had absolutely no discretion when it came to eating, just like our modern crocodiles of today. But could something like this still be alive, hiding somewhere in the swamps and marshes of North Carolina? The answer is probably not. It went extinct millions of years ago, before dinosaurs ever existed. But in a way, the crocodiles still living in the United States are just great descendants of these sharp-toothed monsters. Aspidicolone. The aspidicolone is a mythical creature from medieval bestiaries. It's described in folklore and legend as a gigantic whale, a huge fish, or some kind of sea turtle so big that its back holds an entire island on top of it. I'm talking about an island with trees, rocky cliffs, valleys, and enough room to build a small village. The aspidicolone supposedly rises to the surface from the great depths of the sea every now and then, and is so massive that when it dives back under the surface, it sucks down all the ships that are near it. But what if this mythical creature is a real creature from the prehistoric days? That's the question everyone wants an answer to. Tales of the aspidicolone go back centuries, and they clearly got their inspiration from something grounded in reality. All kinds of seafarer accounts, from France to Rome, speak of witnessing a fish so big it must have come from the depths of hell itself. In England, they called the monster Phastitocolon and labeled it a devil. In ancient Rome, Pliny the Elder named it the Pristus and called it a giant fish. Stories of the island/creature hybrid can be found in the texts of ancient Greece, Egypt, and even Old Babylonia. Nobody knows exactly what prehistoric monster these ancient people were witnessing, but it can't all be a coincidence. Surely there was something big enough to be mistaken for an island swimming around in the ocean. We just don't know what it was. Deep sea shark. The Greenland shark is one of the most spectacular animals on the planet, a creature which can live upwards of 400 years, maybe even longer. Scientists have been studying these animals for the past few decades and have uncovered all kinds of amazing facts. For example, Greenland sharks are often blind because of a specific parasite which attaches itself to their corneas. These sharks aren't like great whites in their feeding habits. They prefer to eat fish and squid and scavenge carcasses that they find in the water. The Greenland shark is officially the longest living vertebrate on Earth. In 2016, a shark was found off the coast of Greenland to be 272 years old. This is the largest fish in the Arctic Ocean, and they frequently dive to 7,200 feet beneath the surface, living at temperatures as low as 28.4 degrees Fahrenheit. The Greenland shark is likely the closest thing we have on the planet to an actual prehistoric megalodon. It can grow to be nearly 25 feet long and is one of the oldest sharks in existence. In 2022, we learned something even more incredible about this elusive deep-sea creature. One of them was spotted swimming in the Western Caribbean, thousands of miles from the Arctic Ocean. This was a major shock to scientists because nobody thought they could live outside the Arctic. It now looks like the Greenland shark can live wherever it wants, even in the balmy waters of the Caribbean. The shark was caught by accident during a tiger shark tagging expedition by students at the Florida International University. The mysterious megalodon. Speaking of gigantic sharks, let's take a look at the possibility of a megalodon still swimming around in the world's oceans. We know the megalodon was 3 times bigger than a great white shark. It was the largest shark to ever live, and it dominated the seas for roughly 15 million years. Scientists are also fairly certain that the megalodon went extinct 3.6 million years ago. However, there is a lot that scientists don't know. For example, no one knows what the megalodon actually looked like. Because sharks are made up almost entirely of cartilage, they leave behind no reliable bones except for their teeth. Everything we know about the megalodon is based on fossilized teeth. Still, scientists can do a lot with teeth. According to Daniel Sigmund from Princeton University, the megalodon's bite would have been impossible to survive. Unlike shark attacks these days, where most people are lucky enough to get away with their lives, a shark attack by a megalodon would have been 100% fatal. It was so big, its teeth so robust, and the strength of its bite so strong that nobody would have escaped its powerful jaws. Even though our oceans are so big and we're still learning so much about sharks, there's a very small chance that the megalodon is still alive somewhere, perhaps in the Mariana Trench. When the giant predator was alive, the ocean was about 4 or 5 degrees warmer than it is today. It was also much more bountiful, and for this reason, it's not out of the realm of possibility for another great shark like the megalodon to rise up, assuming the ocean keeps on warming and fish numbers rise to pre-industrial levels. The land of mammoths. Depending on who you ask, there are woolly mammoths still living in the Siberian taiga. To be completely honest, it is a possibility. The Siberian wilderness is one of the largest expanses of untouched snowy forest in the entire world. There are some places in Siberia that you can't even get to by road, and that are so remote that people haven't stepped foot there in centuries. Human beings lived alongside mammoths up until an estimated 3,380 years ago. The last woolly mammoth was likely hunted and killed by a group of humans on Wrangel Island in Russia. Unfortunately, there's not any significant proof that a small group of mammoths still roam the frozen tundra. There was a rumor in the 1940s that a military pilot flew over the dense forest in Yakutia and witnessed a small herd of elephant-like animals. In 1978, something similar happened in the same region on the banks of the Indigirka River. About a dozen mammoths were supposedly seen drinking. These days, scientists say it's all a bunch of nonsense, but local Russians believe wholeheartedly that in Yakutia, far away from the hustle and bustle of society, there is a small herd of mammoths trying desperately to survive. The giant prehistoric panda. Did you know that the modern panda bear is actually the last living remnant of a gigantic prehistoric panda that lived in the forest and swamps of Eastern Europe? If not, you do now. The prehistoric panda lived 6 million years ago and actually migrated from Eastern Europe into Asia, eventually morphing into China's favorite national animal. We got proof of this recently when paleontologists dug up 2 fossilized upper teeth in Bulgaria. Similar teeth have also been found in Spain and Hungary. Analysis showed that they belong to a relative of the modern giant panda, one that was just as big, but perhaps even more ferocious. It was at least 6 feet long and 250 pounds, but it didn't eat bamboo. According to Professor Nikolai Spasov from the Bulgarian National Museum of Natural History, it ate swamp leaves. There wouldn't have been any bamboo in Europe back then. And besides, its teeth were more useful for slicing leaves than crushing bamboo. But the teeth have also given scientists a bit of insight into the evolution of the panda bear. It's believed the bear may have started out carnivorous, only to be pressured into vegetarianism by large predators. It was too slow to compete with tigers and saber-tooths, so it had no choice but to change its diet. The next time you see a panda bear, remember it's actually a prehistoric beast with a bloodline going back millions of years. Indonesian Triceratops. In December of 2020, a video appeared online showing a living Triceratops being led down from the bed of a truck by men with ropes and face masks. People were quick to make some wild assumptions. Some said it was definitely a real Triceratops, the result of some kind of Jurassic Park scenario breeding program. However, as cool as that would be, the Triceratops wasn't real at all. It was a puppet that was being dramatically hauled out of a truck and taken to the Mohosemi Forest Park in Indonesia. Although the Triceratops definitely looked alive in the blurry footage, it was operated by 2 people inside an extremely elaborate costume. The sad truth is that there are no Triceratops on the planet anymore. The dinosaur went extinct during the Cretaceous period 66 million years ago when the asteroid smashed into the planet and killed basically all of the dinosaurs that couldn't fly. The giant anaconda. The giant anaconda was described by the 19th century explorer Percy Fawcett upon his expedition to South America. Fawcett claimed that he saw with his own eyes a massive prehistoric snake from the days of the dinosaurs at least 40 feet in length. And while one hot and sweaty and almost certainly delirious explorer can't fully be trusted, many others have seen the same thing. The gigantic snake is so famous to the Amazonians who live in the jungle that they have a name for it. They call the monster Yakumama, which means mother of water. To be fair, it sounds as if Fawcett and other explorers like him witnessed a titanoboa, not an anaconda. The largest living snake today, the green anaconda, just doesn't stack up to claims of a 40-foot serpent. These snakes are huge, but can only reach about 23 feet long maximum. On the other hand, the titanoboa was nearly 50 feet long. Plus, in the early 2000s, pieces of its enormous vertebrae and chunks of its skull were found in South America, confirming it as the biggest snake that ever lived. It was the king of the early Amazon, the serpentine equivalent of the Tyrannosaurus rex. The titanoboa was so huge that it weighed as much as an adult black rhino, about 2,500 pounds. Could a small family of these snakes still be living in the jungle? It is unlikely, but definitely not impossible. Land shark. Scientists recently captured some footage of a shark walking on land. It happened on a remote stretch of beach in Papua New Guinea in May of 2022. The shark used its fins to drag itself out of the water and onto the shore, then shimmied itself across a low tide pool like a sea lion on the beach. As incredible as this was, it wasn't the first time a shark brought itself out of the water and started walking. It happened hundreds of millions of years ago when the very first fish flopped out of the sea and grew legs. The biggest difference is that this is happening in real time. In the 21st century, it was a very small species of shark that accomplished such a feat. It's called an epaulette shark, and this was the first time in history that this species was documented walking, according to conservationist expert Forrest Galante. Researchers believe it gained this skill for the purpose of foraging for food on land, in a unique environment where no other shark could survive. The prehistoric gar. A prehistoric monster was recently captured in the Choctawhatchee River in Florida. Researchers with the Fish and Wildlife Research Institute found a completely black, long-nosed gar swimming up the river. It was covered in scales, its mouth was full of prickly teeth, and it was literally as black as tar. The biologists were shocked because the prehistoric gar clearly suffered from a case of melanism. This is the opposite of albinism, when a creature has abnormally dark colorization of their skin or scales or fur. It's super rare, and even more rare to be found on a creature from the days of the dinosaurs. It was almost like finding a melanistic T-Rex, but obviously not quite as exciting. In truth, the long-nosed gar in Florida is older than the Tyrannosaurus rex. It's been living in North America for over 100 million years. It's a huge fish that can grow over 8 feet long, one that outlived the dinosaurs and survived the Great Extinction, only to be pulled out of the river and photographed by curious scientists. Thanks for watching! If there was just one dinosaur still alive, which one would you want it to be? Let me know in the comments below, and be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. See you next time! Bye!